Hello and welcome to the professional development session entitled Ethics in Action, Ethics in Educational Speech Language Pathology and Audiology. My name is Dr. Kelly Ellis and I will be presenting this professional development session on behalf of the Southeast South Central Educational Cooperative. Per the requirements in the field of speech language pathology, I am committed to providing and sharing my financial and non-financial disclosures prior to beginning the session. In regard to financial disclosures, I am a faculty member at Eastern Kentucky University, where I serve as an associate professor and the program coordinator for the Communication Disorders program in the College of Education. Part of my job responsibilities include completion of scholarly work such as publications and presentations. My second financial disclosure to share is that I am receiving an honorarium from the Southeast South Central Educational Cooperative for the development of this professional session today. And I do not have any non-financial disclosures to share that are applicable to the content being presented today. In this webinar, we will be discussing ethics in educational speech language pathology and audiology. The presentation is broken down into two main components. In the first component, we will be looking at models of ethics, including principles of ethics, core value statements, the ASHA Code of Ethics, as well as the Kentucky Licensure Board's Code of Ethics. Then in the second component of the presentation, we will take this information and we will turn it into action as we explore some real-life scenarios through ethical dilemmas that are faced in our field. And we will be looking at some models to overcome things like moral distress and ethical dilemmas. We will be looking at the literature in nursing to review the 4 A's to overcome moral distress. And we will be looking at the ETH-ICS model that I've developed to help speech language pathologists and audiologists navigate ethical dilemmas. We will also be discussing prevention of ethical dilemmas, and then we will explore some special topics in ethics along the way. So we will begin with an exploration of what ethics are in general. If we look to the literature, we would see that ethics are defined as a branch of philosophy which through formal and systematic analysis attempts to critically examine human conduct, focusing on the right or the wrong, the goodness or the harmfulness of actions. Applied ethics includes a description of the conduct of individuals and groups so as to prevent and resolve moral problems. So we know that ethics are not just a discussion that is applicable to speech language pathology. Rather, ethics entail a number of professions, and there are codes of ethics that outline appropriate and inappropriate behavior for a variety of professions. So if we consider the reasons that we would want to be ethical as a speech language pathologist or an audiologist, we could identify many reasons, including the prevention of harm, that we want to be ethical to provide high quality client care, that we want to be ethical to protect the public, that we want to be ethical to treat clients and colleagues fairly, to be truthful, to demonstrate integrity, and ultimately to do the right thing. There are several key ethical concepts that serve as the foundation for many codes of ethics across many different professions. Lisa Power-DeFuhr, who is a speech language pathologist, discusses the key ethical concepts in her presentation on ethics, which is referenced at the end of this professional development session. But according to Power-DeFuhr, the concepts of duty, fidelity, beneficence, non-maleficence, and misconduct serve as those key concepts that drive codes of ethics in, again, a variety of fields. So we will explore each of these separately. In regard to the concept of duty, as a professional who provides a service to the public, the concept of duty is essentially understanding that we have a responsibility or a duty to conform to the standards of our profession. And the standards of our profession include the scope of practice that's identified in licensure law, the code of ethics, and then any licensing acts that impact the practice of speech-language pathology and audiology. In regard to fidelity, we are discussing the faithfulness to one's commitments. So for example, a speech-language pathologist or audiologist who are timely in the submission of their therapy logs or billing logs, that is evidence of being faithful to your commitment. Maintaining continuing education, having accuracy in your documentation, and ensuring no conflict of interest. All of these are examples that are tied to this concept of fidelity. Beneficence is essentially doing good. So it's to do good to others. So if we are being ethical, then our actions will benefit others. So some examples that are applicable to our professions include adjusting the caseload and schedule to accommodate a new client, or perhaps working collaboratively with a team to ensure best service is provided. Non-maleficence is essentially the opposite, which is to do no harm, so to avoid harm. Some examples of things that a speech-language pathologist may do in an effort to demonstrate a commitment to non-maleficence includes consulting with a clinician who has more expertise in an area, perhaps researching local dialects, or declining to work in an area that is outside of the scope of practice. So at this point, we will do an applied learning activity in which I would encourage you to read these examples of behaviors of speech-language pathologists and audiologists and determine if you think that these behaviors most illustrate duty, or if they're more closely related to fidelity, to beneficence, or non-maleficence. So let's take the first one together. If we are adhering to policies and procedures, then do you think that that is tied closer to duty, fidelity, beneficence, or non-maleficence? So I'll give you a moment to think about each of these and to identify the concept that the behavior most illustrates the best. So we've got adherence to policies and procedures, helps colleagues, supervises speech-language pathologists, assistants appropriately, and employs minimally invasive methods. So in my consideration of these behaviors, I thought that adhering to policies or procedures was most closely tied to duty, to your responsibility as a professional. I felt like helping colleagues was an illustration of doing good, which I tied to beneficence. Supervising a speech-language pathology assistant appropriately, I thought was being faithful to your commitment or illustrated fidelity, while employing minimally invasive methods, I thought best worked with non-maleficence, which was doing no harm or avoiding harm. This is a model developed by Powell in 2007 that was published in the Clinical Linguistics and Phonetics Journal. And what Powell did is looked at each of the concepts that underlie ethics and codes of ethics, including the ones we've discussed and a few more, such as compliance, competence, respect, integrity, And then Powell identified how each of these would be evident in interaction with peers first. So if you look at the center of this diagram and you look at the beneficence piece of this circular diagram, you'll see the first layer would be helping others, which would be your peers. And then the second two that follow helping colleagues include your participants or your patients, your students, so facilitating learning or enhancing the quality of life. And then the outermost ring of this circular diagram represents how that concept related to ethics would be evident in your interaction with the public, so maximizing benefits. So I like this model because I think that it shows how ethics are truly multi-layered, and that how a professional can be operating in a way that is ethical in a variety of social circles, including their peers, also including the recipients of their direct service or care, and then also the public. So let's explore the last concept related to codes of ethics, and this would be misconduct. So misconduct can be categorized as intentional or negligent. So misconduct that is intentional is, of course, purposeful, unethical behavior, kind of like on purpose. It was a scheme to defraud or misrepresent yourself to someone. Individuals who engage in intentional misconduct do so because perhaps their self-serving needs outweigh their wish to hold paramount the welfare of those that they're serving. So intentional misconduct is purposeful, but negligent misconduct is also unethical, but it's more of an inadvertent type. So it could be something like you are being careless or inattentive to your duty. So it could still result in unethical behavior, but it's not done perhaps on purpose. So ASHA provides additional clarification about intentional versus negligent misconduct, and they give an example. A lot of the information that I have used for the development of this professional development session actually comes from ASHA's ethics website. So this is, again, an example that's pulled from the ASHA literature. So ASHA provides an analogy of ethical complaints, and they're trying to help illustrate the concept of intentional misconduct and then negligent misconduct. So the example that they provide is to imagine that you are a famous movie star being hounded by paparazzi, taking your picture wherever you go. And even though the photographers remain at a reasonable distance from you and they do not constrain your movement in any manner, you finally get fed up with their persistence and you punch one of the photographers in the face, breaking his nose. So was that action intentional or negligent? You didn't intend to break his nose, you just wanted him to quit harassing you. In this case, it was apparent from your action that your intent was to hit the photographer, even if you didn't intend to break his nose. So under these circumstances, the photographer would likely sue, right, the famous person, alleging an intentional tort, a civil tort, and then seek compensatory damage for things like medical expense, loss of wages, pain, and suffering. Because of the intentional nature of the misconduct, the person may also be ordered to pay the photographer compensation in the form of punitive damage. So that's one example of misconduct, and here is a second scenario. So imagine that you are driving down the street in a large SUV talking on the phone with your daughter. Everything is fine until the subject of your daughter missing her curfew 3 nights in a row comes up, and as the conversation turns into an argument, you become distracted and you drive through a red light without stopping and hit a car that had the right of way. The driver that you hit suffers a broken nose. You did not intend to hit the car, as the movie star intended to hit the photographer. The car crash was an accident caused by your carelessness or your negligence. So you had a duty to drive carefully, but you breached that duty by driving without paying attention, and that breach of duty was the cause of the injury and damage to the other driver. The injured driver can sue you for negligent driving and receive compensatory damage, but you wouldn't have to pay punitive damages, and you wouldn't be subject to the criminal charge of assault and battery. So again, these are just interesting scenarios to consider, of course, not related to speech-language pathology, but I think that they illustrate the difference between intentional and negligent misconduct. And another thing to keep in mind is that even though negligent misconduct is sometimes perceived as less severe of a lapse of ethical judgment, it is still considered unethical behavior, and negligent misconduct can still result in someone seeking a complaint or pursuing a complaint against your license or to ASHA. Okay, so we're going to further explore intentional and negligent misconduct in this learning activity. In this activity, I want you to consider the action. These are directly related to speech-language pathology. And I want you to think through if you think that these actions are intentional or negligent. So what about charging for services not rendered? Is that intentional or negligent? Agreeing to take on an increasing greater number of clients to the extent that you are not providing adequate service to any of them, is that intentional or negligent? Treating clients in a group setting but charging insurance for individual therapy. Hiring 8 clinical fellows in an effort to keep labor costs low and agreeing to be their CFY mentor, knowing that you may not be able to adequately supervise all of them. And then not maintaining adequate records. So if we look at these examples, in my opinion, charging for services not rendered would be intentional misconduct, while agreeing to take on increasingly greater numbers of clients to the extent that you are not providing adequate service could be negligent. Treating clients in a group setting but charging insurance for individual therapy is intentional. Hiring 8 CFs knowing that you can't supervise them is intentional, but not maintaining adequate records could be negligent behavior. Okay, now that we have explored the key concepts related to ethics across any field or profession, I thought the next thing that we could do in our discussion of ethics is to consider core values. So core values are defined as the fundamental beliefs of a person or an organization. These are guiding principles that dictate the behavior of a person or a group and can help people understand the difference between right and wrong. Core value statements exist to help companies or organizations determine if they are on the right path and if they are fulfilling their goal as a group. So I think that exploring core values through the lens of speech-language pathology is a worthwhile use of your time, because I think it's important for us to reflect upon what our fundamental beliefs are, not as an employee of a specific school district or healthcare facility, but as a practitioner, as a professional. What are the fundamental beliefs that you hold to? So some examples of core values include being dependable, a value of commitment, of honesty, of creativity, of positivity, of respect, of service, of good humor, of efficiency, of loyalty. You can see all of these examples of core values that are listed here on this slide. So core values can be tied to life in general, and then core values can also be positive or negative. So some examples of core values that people may have about life include maybe their opinions about how to live a good life. So a belief that family is of fundamental importance might be a core value. A belief that honesty is always the best policy, or that trust has to be earned, or a belief and a commitment in maintaining a healthy work and life balance. So these core values, again, are integrated into how you see the world and what you aspire to do. Some core values, again, can be positive, but they can also be negative. And some of that, I think, is tied to the worldview that you hold and what your lived experiences have taught you as a person. Core values can also be adopted by organizations or companies. So we could spend a lot of time, if we wanted to, looking at corporate core values. So companies can have core values as well, and these are the guiding principles that help define how the corporation should behave in business and perhaps beyond, particularly if the company has an additional mission to serve the community. So I've given you some examples of corporate core values. So one of these is from a healthcare system. So the core value is to put people first through integrity and ethics, through growth, through quality and professionalism, and through continuous improvement. And then there's also an example of a core value for an IT company, including a commitment to first time right, to innovate and make an impact through customer service and learning. So in the next applied learning activity, I'm going to show you some core value statements for companies and see if you can match these core value statements to the corporation or the company. So on this one, we have our vision is to create a better everyday life for many people. Our business idea supports this vision by offering a wide range of well-designed functional home furnishing products at prices so low that as many people as possible will be able to afford them. So that's the long core value statement. And then the shortened motto, if you will, is create a better everyday life. So do you think that one is aligned with IKEA, LinkedIn, or Disney? The next one is we are rich in heritage, tradition, quality, standards, and values that we believe are critical factors to success. We share the values of honesty, integrity, respect, courage, openness, diversity, and balance. So again, think through if you think that is IKEA, LinkedIn, or Disney. And the last one is connect the world's professionals to make them more productive and successful. So if you said the first one was IKEA, you're correct. Create a better everyday life. Disney's core value statement is the long one that reflects lots of different values, including honesty, respect, diversity. And then LinkedIn, of course, was the corporate core value statement related to connecting the world's professionals. Okay, we'll do one more applied learning activity, and then we're going to take this back to the focus of speech-language pathology and audiology. So we've got one choice here. We deliver premium value. We provide outstanding products and unsurpassed service that together deliver premium value to our customers. Treat your customers like human beings. sell good merchandise at reasonable profit, treat your customers like human beings and they will always come back, or sport is the foundation for all we do. The first one was actually American Express. The second was LL Bean, and the last one was Adidas. So again, this learning activity was just to kind of get you thinking about what core value statements are and what core values include. And again, now I would encourage you to take that to your professional experience. What are your core values as a speech language pathologist? Are you, do you hold a core value surrounding optimism, surrounding compassion, surrounding being positive, or serving others? So several years ago, I wrote this professional philosophy that was actually published in an ASHA Leader years and years ago. But now I think, 20 some years later, when I look at it, it kind of makes me chuckle at how naive perhaps I was when I wrote it. But I think that there is still some truth in this professional philosophy, and it definitely helps me reflect upon the core values that I possess as a speech language pathologist. So we have, I will speak for those who cannot be heard. I will provide hope for those who need an encouraging word. I will embrace responsibility that comes with earning credential. I will empower others to achieve their fullest potential. I will celebrate difference and applaud individuality. I will hold tight to my dreams until they become a reality. I will learn that fears only dampen dreams. I will acknowledge that independence can shatter strong teams. I will negotiate with others when compromise is of need. I will guide others to step up and take lead. I will understand that learning is a process never ending. I will advocate for change in policies that need mending. I will govern my actions by the morals I hold dear and embrace new challenges and not be shaken by fear. I will practice professionalism and take pride in all I do. I will always persevere until the challenge is through. I will triumph from success and will grow from defeat. I will honor the opinions of every person I meet. I will overcome conflict by treating others with respect. I will learn from my mistakes and experiences I collect. I will open my heart to the needs of others. I will grow to view my colleagues as sisters and brothers. I will inspire my clients to always believe. I will show others that success can be achieved. I will trust in my abilities without fear of falling and transform my career into my life's calling. Again, this acrostic poem is just an example of statements that I aspired to as I think I was a graduate student when I wrote this. But I can see some of the core values, including, a commitment to collaborative work, to respect, to compassion, to positivity, that are woven into this statement. So as we are exploring ethics and what it means to be ethical, I think a good conversation to have is to explore what your core values are. So a colleague of mine and I did this acrostic poem for our students, just SLP, speak with integrity, listen with empathy, and practice with compassion. So one thing that I would encourage you to do would be to consider what your core values are as a speech language pathologist or audiologist, and then to write down what that core value statement is for you. I think it would even be worthwhile to post it in your office so that you can see it often. Because as we are going to discuss, particularly in the second component of this professional development session, there are times where you find yourself in ethical situations or ethical dilemmas where there's not a clear right or wrong answer. So oftentimes we have to reflect upon those core values and think through if we are being true to who we want to be or who we aspire to be. Okay, now we're going to switch gears. We have talked about the principles that serve as the foundation for codes of ethics, including the principles of fidelity, of duty, of beneficence, of non-maleficence and misconduct. We've also explored core values. And now we're actually going to dig in, and for a moment, we are going to look at the ASHA Code of Ethics as well as the Code of Ethics that is referenced in the Kentucky Licensure Act. So ASHA's Code of Ethics was developed in an effort to preserve the highest standards of integrity and ethical principles. When they were developed, they were thought to be vital to the responsible discharge of obligations by speech-language pathologists, audiologists, and speech and language and hearing scientists. And the codes of ethics set forth the fundamental principles and rules considered essential for our professions. So there are 4 principles, and the Code of Ethics was revised in 2016. So we'll talk some about what is new about the newest version of ASHA's Code of Ethics. So this is the Code of Ethics that, of course, is applicable to people that hold their certificate of clinical competence in either speech-language pathology or audiology. So the new code, or the revision, was completed by the ASHA Board of Ethics. It was mandated by the bylaws, and there was a process used for the revision of the Code of Ethics, including initially the use of a Board of Ethics educational subcommittee. They did an initial code analysis and proposed amendments for discussion and approval. Their recommendation then went to the Board of Ethics as a whole, and then the Board of Ethics then sent their revisions, corrections to the ASHA Board of Directors. So the work in this process included referring to the codes of other relevant professional credentialing associations, as well as adding or expanding themes from actual Board of Ethics adjudicated cases over the past 5 years, and then seeking input from relevant stakeholders. So they looked at kind of what had been happening in terms of complaint processes, and then looking at relevant stakeholders. So what is new about the 2016 Code of Ethics? Some of the new features include an updated preamble, modified language surrounding the Board of Ethics jurisdiction over complaints, as well as a new terminology section. I think that the new terminology section is perhaps the best part of this revision to our Code of Ethics. And then there were revisions to 2 principles, and then there are 15 new rules. Some of the high-profile issues that were explored include uncertified members, so whether or not a person that is not certified should be held to the Code of Ethics, informed consent related to direct services as well as research, diminished decision-making ability, self-disclosure, independent professional judgment, supervision, and research conduct. So we'll talk through these high-profile issues as we go through the Code of Ethics. Okay, so what has not changed about the 2016 ASHA Code of Ethics? The fundamental purpose for the code has not shifted, and then the underlying basis for the 4 principles. So the 4 philosophical principles remain constant: a responsibility to persons served professionally and research participants, a responsibility to professional competence, a responsibility to the public, and a responsibility for professional relationships. Okay, let's explore for a moment the terminology section that again is a new part to the 2016 Code of Ethics. So conflict of interest is one concept that is defined in the Code of Ethics, and this is defined as an opposition between the private interests and the official or professional responsibilities of a person in a position of trust, power, and/or authority. Diminished decision-making ability, that was a hot topic, then that is defined as any condition that renders a person unable to perform the specific intent necessary to determine a reasonable course of action. So diminished decision-making ability can be related to substance abuse, but it can also be related to mental health. So anything that diminishes your ability to make sound decisions. Impaired practitioner is any individual whose professional practice is adversely affected by addiction, substance abuse, or health-related or mental health-related conditions. Fraud is defined as any act, expression, omission, or concealment calculated to deceive others to their disadvantage. And then again, negligence is defined in the new Code of Ethics, and that is the breaching of a duty owed to another, which occurs because of failure to conform to a requirement, and this failure caused harm to another individual, which led to damages and to this person, and failure to exercise the care toward others that a reasonable or prudent person would take in the circumstance, or taking actions that such a reasonable person would not. Crime is defined as any felony or misdemeanor involving dishonesty, physical harm to the person or property of another, or threat of physical harm to the person or property of another. And I've provided the link here to a disclosure form, a disclosure information form. And part of the application process for your ASHA-Cs now includes self-disclosure. So if you have committed or have record of a felony or misdemeanor, you are expected to disclose that information. Self-report is tied to that very concept of professional obligation to self-disclose that requires notifying the ASHA standards and ethics and mailing a hard copy of a certified document to the ASHA standards and ethics board. Misrepresentation is defined as any statement by words or other conduct that under the circumstance amounts to an assertion that is false. Any statement made with a conscious ignorance or reckless disregard of the truth. Okay, so those reflect the new terms that are included in the terminology section. Now we're going to quickly review the changes to the two principles. The changes were in regard to Principle 3 and Principle 4. So the revised Principle 3 reads, individuals shall honor their responsibility to the public when advocating for the unmet communication and swallowing needs of the public, and shall provide accurate information involving any aspects of the professions. So this actually simplified the wording to clarify the meaning and removed examples because the thought was that the examples are provided within the rules section of the Code of Ethics. Principle 4 reads, now individuals shall uphold the dignity and autonomy of the professions, maintain collaborative and harmonious interprofessional and intraprofessional relationships, and accept the profession's self-imposed standards. So this just reflects some minor editing to enhance, according to ASHA, the aspirational nature of the principle. I mentioned that there were revisions to 2 principles in the 2016 Code of Ethics, and there are 15 new rules. So I've included the new rules in the PowerPoint, and you'll see that I did not include the existing rules. So these represent the new rules. Related to Principle 1, we have individuals shall accurately represent the intended purpose of a service, product, or research endeavor and shall abide by established guidelines for clinical practice and the responsible conduct of research. We mentioned earlier that a hot topic was the responsible research. So this new rule is related to that the trend that the Board of Ethics noted. Principle 1, Rule M, is individuals who hold the Certificate of Clinical Competence shall use independent and evidence-based clinical judgment, keeping paramount the best interests of those being served. Principle 1, Rule S, reads, individuals who have knowledge that a colleague is unable to provide professional services with reasonable skill and safety shall report this information to the appropriate authority internally if a mechanism exists, and otherwise externally. So this one is, of course, related to that diminished practitioner term. Then we have Principle 2, Rule B. Members who do not hold the Certificate of Clinical Competence may not engage in the provision of clinical services. However, individuals who are in the certification application process may engage in the provision of clinical services consistent with current local and state laws and regulations with ASHA certification requirements. Individuals who engage in research shall comply with all institutional, state, and federal regulations that address any aspects of research, including those that involve human participants and animals. So that's Principle 2, Rule C. And then we have Rule F for Principle C. Individuals in administrative or supervisory roles shall not require or permit their professional staff to provide services or conduct clinical activities that compromise the staff members' independent and objective professional judgment. And this one, I think, is a hot topic. It's an interesting thing to consider if you have an administrator who is asking you to not make decisions that are in alignment with your independent and professional judgment. How you should handle that, I think, can be a great example of an ethical dilemma. Then Principle 2, Rule G, individuals shall make use of technology and instrumentation consistent with accepted professional guidelines in their areas of practice. When such technology is not available, an appropriate referral may be made. We're now on to Principle 3, Rule G. Individuals shall not knowingly make false financial or non-financial statements and shall complete all materials honestly and without omission. On to Principle 4, Rule A. Individuals shall work collaboratively when appropriate with members of one's own profession and or members of other professions to deliver the highest quality of care. And then we move to Rule F, applicants for certification or membership and individuals making disclosures shall not knowingly make false statements and shall complete all application and disclosure materials honestly and without omission. Again, that gets back at the self-report concept that we reviewed a moment ago. Principle 4, Rule N, states individuals shall report members of other professions who they know have violated standards of care to the appropriate professional licensing authority or board, other professional regulatory board, or professional association when such violations compromise the welfare of persons served and or research participants. So this one is, I think, sometimes difficult because it is saying that we now have a responsibility to not just report speech language pathologists and audiologists that we think have violated standards of care, but that we would need to do that for other professions. Principle 4, Rule Q, individuals involved in ethics complaints shall not knowingly make false statements of fact or withhold relevant facts. And then coming close to the end here, Principle 4, Rule R, individuals shall comply with local, state, and federal laws and regulations applicable to professional practice, research ethics, and responsible conduct of research. Rule S includes individuals who have been convicted, found guilty, or entered a plea of guilty or no contest to any misdemeanor involving dishonesty, physical harm, threat of physical harm, or any felony must inform ASHA. And then the last new rule for the 2016 Code of Ethics reads, individuals who have been publicly sanctioned or denied a license or a professional credential by any professional association, professional licensing authority or board, or other professional regulatory body shall self-report by notifying ASHA Standards and Ethics Board. So again, several new rules are now included in the 2016 ASHA Code of Ethics. I also wanted to make note of, again, this ethics section of the ASHA website. I'm going to click to show you this section of the ASHA website now. But there are several resources that are available on the ASHA website related to ethics. Several articles, of course the Code of Ethics is there, the executive summary and the entire thing, as well as information on the complaint process. And then there are several guidance documents. And I wanted to highlight the section called Issues and Ethics Statement. So if you click that hyperlink, it actually gives you a statement from the ASHA Board of Ethics related to different ethical scenarios that you may face as a practitioner. So ethical use of social media is a newer one. Ethical reporting is a newer one. There are also issue statements about client abandonment or professional conflicts of interest. So you can click on the actual link and it gives you the document showing the background, the definition, and then helping to answer the question related to that area of ethics. So I think this is a very helpful part of the ASHA website that you may not be aware of. Okay, now that we have reviewed ASHA's Code of Ethics, we will quickly look at the Licensure Law Code of Ethics. I'm not going to read each of these to you because there have not been any revisions here. But I do want to provide just a quick overview of the main sections of the Licensing Act and the Code of Ethics that is referenced there in our licensure law. This Code of Ethics, of course, comes from 200 Kentucky Administrative Regulation 17041. So the Code of Ethics, again, is in the Licensing Act. It's a regulation. And we've got 6 different sections. Section 1 outlines the responsibility that we have to our patients. So it includes things like advancing and protecting the welfare of the patient, to not engage in dual relationships, to not use a professional relationship to further your own interests. There are lots of rules here within the licensure laws Code of Ethics for Section 1. So not diagnosing, treating, or advising a problem outside the boundaries of competence, again, falls under Section 1, which is responsibility to patients. to not abandon or neglect a patient without making reasonable arrangements for continuation of treatment. When I served on the licensure board, this was actually one of the complaints that was received frequently. And in my interaction with a national association for licensing boards, I learned more about this as being a trend in terms of people stopping their employment, so turning in their notice or maybe not turning in a sufficient notice that they are going to quit working somewhere, and then the employer filing a complaint that the practitioner abandoned or neglected a patient without making reasonable arrangement. So if you just quit on the spot, contrasted with a 2 weeks notice. Again, section 1 is all about responsibility to patients. So this includes rules like do not videotape, record, or photograph therapy without obtaining consent. Section 2 is about confidentiality. So we'll see lots of rules here related to disclosing patient information and not using patient information in teaching, writing, or presentations unless you have gained permission. Then section 3 is about professional competence and integrity. Section 4 is about responsibility to the student or supervisee. Section 5 is in relation to financial arrangements, so disclosing the fee at the beginning or initiation of service, or not accepting payment for referral. Those rules fall under section 5. And then section 6 is about advertising, which gives us the directive to accurately represent our education, training, and experience. Okay, this brings us to the end of the first part of our professional development session focused on ethics. So we have explored the principles of ethics. We have considered our core values as speech-language pathologists. And we have also looked at ASHA's revision to the Code of Ethics in 2016, as well as provided an overview of the Kentucky Licensing Board's Code of Ethics. Okay, now we're going to begin the second component of the professional development session, in which we explore how to take these models and principles and apply them to our practice. So we will begin the ethics and action section of this PD. So we're first going to talk about ethical dilemmas and moral distress. We will look to some of the literature in the American Association of Critical Care Nurses to explore a model for overcoming moral distress. And then we'll look at an ethics model, and we'll talk about preventing ethical dilemmas, and also exploring some special topics in ethics. So again, we've talked about these models of ethics. We have a very thorough code of ethics for our profession that was relatively, I guess, recently revised. So all of this seems very black and white. But if you've worked even for a short period of time in our profession or any profession, I would argue that what may seem like a black and white decision or a right and wrong decision sometimes becomes very gray when we consider ethical dilemmas. So let's talk through what an ethical dilemma or moral distress is. So according to the American Association of Critical Care Nurses, moral distress occurs when you know the ethically appropriate action to take, but you're unable to do it. So you act in a manner that is contrary to your personal and professional values, which ultimately undermines your integrity and authenticity. So sources of moral distress can come from your personal life, from interpersonal, or from environmental sources. So moral distress in my mind is when you're in the middle of a scenario in which you're being torn between, do I do this, do I do that? Is it this answer, is it that answer? So what again, may seem very straightforward until you're walking that walk and living that experience. Now feels very much kind of a very big gray area. So moral distress may feel like suffering. So according to the Critical Care Nurses Association, moral distress can feel like suffering. It can lead to burnout. It can lead to people leaving a field or resigning if left unresolved, and it may be tied to poor communication. So groups of people who work together in situations that face moral distress often can experience poor communication, lack of trust, high turnover, defensiveness, lack of collaboration. So some of the barriers to taking action when you face moral distress may include a lack of awareness. So not really knowing where to turn to get the answer on how to deal with the moral distress. Hopefully some of the resources that we're highlighting in this professional development session will provide you with some insight to remove this barrier of a lack of awareness. Insufficient skills or lack of confidence or fear may also serve as internal barriers to resolving moral distress. And then there can be external barriers like institutionalized obstacles, a lack of time, perhaps a lack of administrative support, power imbalances, policy, legal limits. So there could be several reasons why people do not take action when they're in moral distress. And again, moral distress is when you're struggling knowing what to do. Maybe you even know what you should do, but you're unable to act upon it. So moral distress, according to the American Association of Critical Care Nurses, isn't always negative. So it can lead to positive change, to positive outcome if we handle it appropriately. So again, the American Association of Critical Care Nurses identifies this model to resolve or to rise above moral distress. They call it the 4 A's to rise above moral distress, and these include the A's of asking, affirming, assessing, and acting. What I appreciate about this model in particular is that it shows the cyclical nature of resolving a moral distress or an ethical dilemma. So you may need to repeat this process more than one time until you find success or until you have truly risen above the moral distress. So the first part of the model is the A that stands for ask. So this is a stage, of course, of self-awareness and self-reflection. The goal is to become aware that moral distress is present. So you would ask yourself, am I feeling distressed or showing signs of suffering? Is the source of my distress, I'm super stressed out, is the source of that related to work? Have coworkers, friends, or family members noticed signs or symptoms of you being stressed out at home? So it's this self-reflection of, hey, I know that, I'm stressed out. What is the source? What is causing this behavior? You could also self-reflect if you're observing symptoms of distress within your team. Again, the goal is to become aware that moral distress is present. Then after the A that represents the asking phase, then we move into affirm. But on this slide, I did want to show some of the symptoms related to moral distress that go beyond just the emotional or behavioral realm. So if you're feeling anxiety, confusion, those are all emotional manifestations of distress. But you can also have some physical symptoms like fatigue, exhaustion, hyperactivity, headaches, impaired sleep, if you are facing moral distress. So it's important, again, to be self-reflective in the ask phase to figure out, you know, are you self-aware of the distress? Okay, moving on into the second A of affirm. This is where you will affirm your stress. So you're going to acknowledge that it's there, and then you're going to affirm a commitment to resolve it, to take care of yourself. You're recognizing that prolonged suffering due to moral distress can be detrimental to your personal and professional life. You have an opportunity to be free from moral distress, and you have a professional responsibility to contribute to the creation of a healthy work environment for your clients as well as your colleagues. So in the affirm phase, you're going to validate your feelings and perceptions with others. This is where you may talk to coworkers, SLPs in other settings, families, members and friends to seek validation. You're also going to affirm your professional responsibility to act. So this is where you'll think through the ASHA Code of Ethics, the Licensure Board Code of Ethics, because your goal here is to make a commitment to address the moral distress or the ethical dilemma. The next A after affirm is to assess. So this is where you are going to identify the sources of your distress. You're going to think through the circumstances. You're going to think through if other people experience distress or suffering related to the sources. Again, the sources could be related to interpersonal, personal, or environmental factors. And you will determine the severity of the situation and determine your readiness to act using a self-assessment. So the nursing literature provides us with this scale. It's like a little quiz where you ask yourself, on a scale from 0 to 5, rate your response to each of the following assessment questions. How important is it for you to try to change your situation? From 0, not at all, to 5, very. How important would it be to your colleagues to have the situation changed? How important would a change be to the students or families you serve? How strongly do you feel about trying to change the situation? How confident are you in your ability to make the changes occur? And how determined are you to work toward making the change? So you would answer each of those, divide by 6, and then you would match your score to the barometer, the readiness to act barometer, which is displayed on this slide. So if your score is from 0 to maybe 2, then you're feeling some distress, but you're not ready to take action. Then from about 2 to 4, feeling distressed but uncertain. And then above that, feeling distressed and ready to take action. So you recognize perhaps that there's an issue, but may be unsure about taking action. So you might need to repeat the ask and affirm part of the model. Then you're contemplating this readiness, like should you tackle this ethical dilemma? Let's say you are working in a district where the director of special education is asking you to do something as a speech language pathologist that you think violates your independent professional judgment. So maybe she wants every kid, I'm just coming up with this on the fly, but she wants to give every kid the same tests and nothing else to determine eligibility for service. And you're interacting with a kid that you think really needs a separate assessment. So you are using this model of the 4 A's to figure out, am I stressed out about this? Yes. How ready am I to act? So you consider the risks and the benefits of your action. So then the other part of this model, if you should choose to go to this level of detail, would be to make kind of a benefit and risk table. So make a table with 4 columns, label the far left column benefits and the third column risks, and then you brainstorm to identify the potential benefit and risks involved with the action And you could even rate it if you're kind of a numbers person to figure out if you should take action with this moral distress that you're facing. The Nursing Association also reminds us that the best way to affect change is to diminish or remove the risk. So if you're uncertain, you may need to consider the 4 R's of relevance, risk, reward, and roadblocks. So you're just really kind of thinking very thoroughly about the consequence of taking action, as well as the consequence of not taking action. So in regard to relevance, you might imagine the impacts you could have, the improved client care, enhanced relationships, enhanced personal well-being, or professional satisfaction. In regard to the risk, you would consider the risk, again, of acting, and then the risk of not acting, and then the reward. So you might imagine how you would feel after you take the action, and then you could also consider any roadblocks. So identifying roadblocks that you think could halter progress or could create opposition. Okay, then if you go to the final A of the 4 A's to rise above moral distress, then we're going into the action phase. And this is where you are addressing internal and external barriers, reducing risks, and maximizing your strengths. Consider personal changes that will make you a viable agent of change. And if necessary, you may need to develop a self-care plan. If it is truly a distressing situation, you may need to engage in self-care activities that help you deal with the negative consequence of resolving the situation. You could identify appropriate sources of support like coworkers, or therapists that work outside of your setting. You could investigate outside resources for guidance, including the ASHA Board of Ethics, maybe the licensing board, as well as professional associations. You could take action that addresses the specific sources of distress within your environment. And then we are acknowledging that with the act, the goal is to preserve integrity and authenticity, that you want change, and that you will continue to reassess if the obstacle persists, and you might have to go through the 4 A's again. So again, this model is described in the critical care nursing literature. I think it's just interesting to think about all of these small strategies that you can execute when you're facing kind of that turbulent feeling of not knowing what to do to resolve an ethical dilemma when you're stuck in the middle of a gray kind of area. The next model that we're going to look at is one that I developed a couple of years ago to help speech paths and audiologists navigate ethical dilemmas. I got very creative and called it the ethics model. But for the E, we're going to explicitly describe the situation. The TH represents thinking about all possibilities. I represents investigating the impact of each option. C, consulting with others. And then S, strategize your next steps. So we'll look at this model next. So if I'm facing moral distress or an ethical dilemma, the first thing that I would recommend doing is stating what happened. So state what you know, clearly, objectively, and based solely upon facts, things that you have evidence of, things that you've experienced, seen, heard, not hearsay. So again, I'm going to state what I know clearly and objectively. Let's take the example of maybe having a colleague that you suspect has diminished decision-making ability. If you have seen your colleague using alcohol or another substance while at work, then clearly that is a different situation than just the rumor surrounding someone. So I think the distress that you may have is whether or not to report the person. So again, the first thing I would do would be explicitly describe the situation. So what do you know that has happened, clearly, objectively, based upon facts? Then consider, why is it significant? So reflect upon the situation. Is it moral distress? Is it a legal issue, a policy issue? Is it an ethical issue? So again, power to fear would tell us, hey, is it truly something that you need to act upon? Is it a difference of opinion, or is it truly an ethical issue that you should report? I think the next best step would be to specify the suspected violation, where you would look at the code of ethics and you would say, okay, here's what I'm challenged with. Here's the principle and the rule that it's tied to. So if I can't find a principle or rule tied to a situation, then that answers the question, right? That it's nothing that is perhaps warranting a report to a licensing or credentialing body. So I want to think about the significance by reflecting upon it and specifying the violation. Under the TH part of this model, we're essentially just thinking. We're thinking about all the possibilities. So all the possible courses of action that you could take, recognizing that doing nothing is a choice, So brainstorm all the possible actions. Options may include reporting suspected violations, doing nothing, discussing and resolving with a colleague, supervisor, or compliance officer, or gathering more information. So we're recognizing that each action has a burden and a benefit. On I, investigate the impact of each option. So for TH, we've thought about it, we've identified the action, and now we are investigating the impact of each. So you might be kind of wired to do a pro and con, right, chart. So strengths and weaknesses, pros and cons. So the pros and cons of each choice. Acknowledge that acknowledge an ethical dilemma that may be present. When possible, Power de Fury would say, search for a win-win, like win in that it resolves the ethical dilemma, and win that it removes the opportunity for that dilemma to occur again. But recognize that there's rarely a zero risk option. So if we go back to reporting a colleague that you suspect has diminished decision-making ability, there's a risk involved with that, right? You may, a friendship may end. There may be a lack of trust. I mean, there's rarely a zero risk option. And then reflecting upon the following. Would someone say that you have a vested self-interest in filing a complaint? Could you live with yourself if you took the action? Could you live with yourself if you did not take the action? If you made the decision, would you get consensus regarding your action from a trusted colleague? And then you could think about conflict management style. The C part of ethics is to consult with others. So this is not in an attempt to be gossipy, right? But it's to ask for someone's opinion, maybe a trusted colleague, a supervisor, or mentor. Again, you could seek clarification from a licensing board in your state or from ASHA. And then the S would be to strategize your next steps. So take the action and then support your decision. Document, 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 and think about the prevention of similar incidents in the future. And then again, consider self-care. As we noted from the section where we explored the critical care nurses literature, we know that moral distress can take its toll on you physically, emotionally, so consider self-care. This next slide shows a model for ethical decision making that ASHA published in 2003. This is a 10-step process. It's similar to the ethics model we just reviewed. So identify the problem as you see it, get the story straight, gather relevant data, ask yourself if the problem is regulatory or a process issue, compare the issue to a specific rule, identify who has power in the situation, identify what is in your control and what is not, identify your resources, which could include, again, consultation with a colleague or a board of ethics. Make a list of possible actions and their positive or negative consequences. Make a plan you can defend professionally, and then take action. Okay, ASHA also gives us some guidance in terms of how to avoid ethical dilemmas. So we've talked about what they are. We've talked through the 4 A's, what you should do when you're facing a moral dilemma or an ethical dilemma. And then we've now looked at 2 different models to resolve ethical dilemmas. So now let's talk about just avoidance, avoiding the gray area to begin with. So advocating for best practice is one way to avoid an ethical dilemma. To use evidence-based practice as the basis for decision making. To gain an understanding of the ASHA Code of Ethics, as well as your employer's handbook and guidelines, maybe a district's policies and procedures, and noting any inconsistencies there. Connecting the Code of Ethics with the program's mission statement, policies, and procedures, I just said that. And then acquainting supervisors, administrators, and colleagues of the codes of ethics. So advocating, increasing others' awareness. Huffman in 2003 said, the best way to maximize the Code of Ethics utility is to use it proactively. So to anticipate what may be a dilemma and to be proactive. Okay, discussing potential ethical issues before they become a problem is, of course, a great strategy, not always possible. And then finally, reviewing federal, state, and local regulations and requirements. Now we'll turn to a discussion of the most frequently reported ethical quandaries. And again, this is taken from the ASHA's website. Documentation lapses represent one of the most frequently reported ethical quandaries. Employer demands, such as increasing caseloads, tighter time limits, productivity quotas, rejecting independent professional judgment, those are also frequently reported ethical quandaries. The use of and supervision of students and support personnel, and then client abandonment, and that's one we've already talked about. Reimbursement for service also appears to be a frequently reported ethical quandary, including scheduling services more frequently or for longer than is reasonably necessary, misrepresenting information to obtain reimbursement. Business competition can also create ethical quandaries, impaired practitioners, and then affirmative disclosure. Okay, now let's talk through the complaint procedure. So if you decide perhaps that you want to file a complaint, or if you find yourself on the receiving end of a complaint, let's explore this procedure so that you have some background knowledge. ASHA receives approximately 3,000 ethic inquiries per year, according to the website. And there is a board of ethics that exists to do work like revise the board of ethics codes of ethics, but also to handle the complaint process. So we have 16 members on the board of ethics. At least 5 are audiologists, 5 are speech language pathologists, 1 public member, and then an ethics education subcommittee, which has 4 members. So the Board of Ethics meets in person 3 times a year. And in terms of the jurisdiction, at present, the ASHA Board of Ethics does not have jurisdiction over assistants that are practicing alone, the board's jurisdiction is over certified members or applicants only. There is a new avenue for SLPAs to gain certification. So when that is in place, then of course those SLPAs would be under this jurisdiction. And then in terms of the complaint procedure, voluntarily resigning your ASHA membership or your Cs does not stop the complaint process. So complaints have to be submitted electronically. The complainant must sign a waiver. The copy of the complaint is sent to the person that's being accused, and the person that is receiving the complaint has to submit a response to the allegations within 45 days. Then the board makes an initial determination where the code of ethics, principles and rules that were violated, as well as a proposed sanction, proposed extent of the sanction is revealed or is provided to the person that's being accused. The respondent can request further consideration through an appeal that has to be submitted within 30 days. And then there is a final determination that is made. So the complaint procedure can result in a reprimand, in a censure, in suspension, revocation, or withholding. So a sanction could be a cease and desist order. A reprimand is a formal rebuke or condemnation with limited disclosure. Censure is a public reprimand with broad disclosure. So that might be the things that you've seen in the ASHA leader. Suspension of membership is a sanction that temporarily interrupts the respondent's membership in and/or certification by the association for a period of time. And then revocation is a sanction that terminates the respondent's membership in and certification by the association for a period of time specified. And then withholding is only applicable to people that are in the process of seeking certification. Again, disclosure is an announcement about the complaint, and it's published in the ASHA leader if it is a censured or membership certification is withheld. A reprimand is not published. And it's also provided to the state licensing agency. A reprimand is disclosed only to the accused, the complainant, and the ASHA staff. So some questions about the ASHA ethics complaint process. Can a complaint be filed anonymously? No. Can anyone file a complaint? Yes. Can an entity, an organization, business, file a complaint? Yes. Can a complaint be filed against an SLP who is not an ASHA member? No, that goes against the jurisdiction. Can a complaint be filed against a group? No. Can I avoid an ethics action if I resign? No. Can complaints be submitted via fax or email? No. Okay, and then in regard to the ASHA, or I'm sorry, the Kentucky Licensing Board, there is a complaint committee, and the powers of the board include administering, coordinating, and enforcing the provisions of licensure law. The licensing board may issue subpoenas, examine witnesses, administer oaths, investigate, etc., and they can conduct administrative hearings. There is an attorney that helps to support the board, and then according to our regulation 334A010, every person who holds a license shall be governed and controlled by the rules of the profession conduct. So in terms of the licensing board, causes for revocation, suspension, or denial may include obtaining a license by means of fraud, if you're guilty of unprofessional conduct, if you have violated a lawful order, rule, or regulation, if you've represented professional services or advice of a physician while failing to affix the words pertaining to the profession, and the board may deny, suspend, revoke, or fine licensees, but the fine per licensure law cannot exceed $1,000. Okay, now that we have finished our discussion of the principles of ethics, we've reviewed things like the core values that you may possess as a practitioner, and we've looked at the codes of ethics that dictate the practice of speech-language pathology and audiology. And we've also considered ethical dilemmas and some strategies to overcome moral distress. We will spend the remainder of our time exploring together some special topics in ethics. And these include a discussion of the use of social media as a professional, as well as the new code of conduct that ASHA adopted for certified assistants. So these are kind of trends in our field, definitely special topics that impact our practice. So social media is, of course, increasing each year in terms of the number of people that are engaging in the use of social media. So 10 years ago, you might have called a colleague, read a book or a journal article, or contacted a college professor when you were doing things like looking for treatment recommendations or thinking through ways to promote your private practice or attempting to connect with other professionals. We can still do all of those things, talking with a colleague, consulting a book or journal, but now more than ever, we are more likely to post a question or search for the answer to these questions using social media to get the answer. ASHA references on its website a study in which speech-language pathologists in the 41 to 50-year-old age group may be more likely to seek treatment recommendations and resources on social media than other groups. This study that they quote was out of Keene University. The age group that had the highest percentage of participants who reported using Facebook for treatment recommendation for speech sound disorders was the 41, again, to 50 age group, compared with participants that were between 21 and 40 or older than 51. This was the only group in this study to report posting 4 or more times per month. And the study also found that the 41 to 50 age group rated level 4 evidence, like case studies and expert opinions, as the most valuable, which is interesting, when compared to the younger groups who placed a higher value on level 1 or 2, which would be research like randomized clinical trials or studies that had an experimental and a control group. So this is only one study, of course, but it indicates that this age group relies a great deal on accessing social media, case studies, and clinical opinions, and highly values the advice that you receive when engaging on those platforms. So we know that Facebook can be used for looking for treatment recommendations, as well as can be used to promote a private practice. So Facebook business pages and professional discussion groups are changing the ways that speech-language pathologists and audiologists interact with one another, share information, discuss cases. So there is definitely a lot of benefit associated with that ability to get a quick, sometimes immediate response. So Facebook makes communication accessible, and it's a great way to connect and network with other people. But ASHA warns us to beware that there are also many cons to sharing and seeking information on social media. And ASHA actually provides several guidance documents that we are going to explore to make sure that the use of social media does not represent a violation of the ASHA Code of Ethics. So when we're talking about social media use, there are 3 principles to the ASHA Code of Ethics that we want to be mindful of. This information is described in a series of articles that's available on the ASHA website, and then of course the Code of Ethics themselves are available on ASHA's website as well. So the 3 principles that we want to be mindful of include Principle 3, Rule E. Individual statements to the public shall provide accurate and complete information about the nature and management of communication disorders, about the professions, about professional services, as well as products for sale and research and scholarly activities. So we've got to be mindful that we're not posting information that is not accurate about a number of things, right? But the nature and management of communication disorders and the profession being one. Okay, Principle 1, Rule O, is that individuals shall protect the confidentiality and security of records of professional services provided, research and scholarly activities conducted, and products dispensed. Access to these records shall be allowed only when doing so is necessary to protect the welfare of the person or the community, is legally authorized, and is otherwise required by law. So it's the principle, of course, related to confidentiality. So being sure that our posts don't violate confidentiality requirements. Then the last one that is identified as applicable to the use of social media includes Principle 1, Rule P. Individuals shall protect the confidentiality of any professional or personal information about persons served professionally or participants involved in research and scholarly activities, and may disclose confidential information only when doing so is necessary to protect the welfare of the person or the community, is legally authorized, or is otherwise required by law. So this is another principle that is focused on confidentiality. Okay, so as I mentioned a moment ago, ASHA has lots of information and guidance about the use of social media. One of the statements that really resonated with me when preparing for this webinar is the statement that's listed here on the left. With the advent of social media and the continued popularity of online communication platforms, we have all become publishers. We are all eager to express ourselves and our opinions, and while at ASHA we are all about communication, there is a growing concern that civility and basic respect for one another are on the decline nationwide. So if you haven't yet thought about this notion of how to engage with others in a civil manner, then again, ASHA has resources that help provide clarity and thinking about particularly your use of social media as a certified speech-language pathologist or audiologist. So we want to keep in mind that participating in discussions can be helpful. They can build a sense of community, but we also need to keep in mind that engaging on social media is never private. It's never private. So even if your account settings are on private, individuals can still take screenshots of comments and conversations and post them online. So we need to be very diligent of making sure that our discussions and posts don't violate confidentiality, don't misrepresent our services, and then also do not engage in any defamation of character of another person. And we'll explore that a little more in a moment. So in general, I think ASHA would say exercise good judgment by avoiding personal attacks, promote civility within the professions, and to view your comments through the lenses of current or future supervisors, students, legislators, or patients. Okay, I've pulled up the ASHA website that includes the ASHA Civility Digital Toolkit. This is an excellent guide that helps provide support and guidance for the appropriate use of social media. It does include a background section as well as guiding principles. The guiding principles reference when the use of social media may represent a violation of the code of ethics. So it talks about the need to demonstrate respect, encourage constructive dialogues, to discourage public belittling of colleagues, to model professionalism, etc. The website also includes some scenarios like how to handle someone that's engaging with you in an aggressive manner on social media. There are guidelines, references, and resources. So this is an excellent resource for the use of social media. I also want to show you one more. So if I'm on ASHA's website and I just search ethics, I think it's usually the second hit that I select here, the ASHA ethics resources. And then again, the issues and ethics statements are very helpful. And there is one that is focused solely on social media use, and that is referenced here. It was published this year, but it talks through and provides a lot of the same information that I've included in the presentation for you. So again, remembering that we need to ensure that social media use does not breach confidentiality, does not misrepresent the promotion of services, products, and listings of credentials. And then we also want to ensure that our remarks that may constitute defamation are not used. So we want to avoid posting anything that is not factual about another person or organization. Okay, so in returning to the PowerPoint, let's look now at some of the insight provided by Merkett Walsh and Moore. And this was a publication in the ASHA Leader a couple of years ago. The title of the article is something like social media, it's not, I'm going to pull it up. Social media, let's see, it's different for professionals. So to me, the title of that presentation grabs your attention because it's saying, hey, social media, if you're a professional, should look a little different, or we have to exercise some caution. So they gave us these suggestions in the article, some do's and don'ts. So do post a question to a small specialized group, but they encourage you not to post a picture and ask for a diagnosis, like showing perhaps a baby's mouth with the caption of, is this a tongue tie? So Merkett Walsh and Moore talk about how a picture is not an accurate portrayal of any disorder, that a look at function is needed, but that the photo may inadvertently indicate the patient's identity. So this is, of course, a violation of HIPAA, as well as the confidentiality principles that we just reviewed. So they would tell us, do keep your posts general, do not be case specific. So even if you think that you're leaving out identifying information, others may be able to find out who your client is, especially if you are working with a low incidence disorder. So sometimes it's not hard to figure out who a person is referring to. So your profile can have public information such as where you live, where you work, and this may provide clues to a client's identity and could be a breach of confidentiality. So instead of writing, I have a 3-year-old client with a hearing loss who is in a regular classroom, has production of difficulty with production of the S sound and receive speech therapy 3 times a week, you could post a request just asking for others to identify resources for articulation treatment for children with hearing loss. So there's a difference between that. I have a 3-year-old with a hearing loss in a regular classroom, blah, 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 just asking and being direct for the resources that are needed. So again, the authors here tell us to ask for a reply by phone or a HIPAA compliant email address. They mentioned that the use of Facebook Messenger, even if you're communicating, let's say, between another therapist and yourself, to remember that Facebook Messenger to discuss patients should be avoided because that messaging system is not HIPAA compliant. Then we do want to refrain from engaging in unprofessional discourse. They suggest that we respond graciously, declining from any discussion in a topic in a public forum, private message, state your concerns, but don't engage in unprofessional discourse or post inflammatory statements that you wouldn't want your supervisor, clients, patients, or colleagues to see. They also talk about how it is inappropriate to shame another clinician, given that professionalism is a part of the Code of Ethics, particularly the Principle 4 that states individuals shall uphold the dignity and autonomy of the professions, maintain collaborative and harmonious inter- and intra-professional relationships. So, you know, bashing another clinician on social media should be avoided. Okay, so can the inappropriate use of social media constitute an ethical violation? And again, according to ASHA, yes, under certain circumstances, like if you are posting distinctive personal information about your clients or research subjects that breaches confidentiality, if you're misrepresenting services, products, or listings of credentials. And you should also keep in mind that you want to avoid remarks that may constitute defamation. Defamation being verbal and written statements that are factually false. So not opinion, but factually false. So defamation, of course, is something that you wouldn't want to engage in, as it could be a violation of the Code of Ethics. So in summary, ASHA concludes, under some circumstances, the inappropriate use of social media may lead to ethical violations under the code. Examples of such violations include posting distinctive personal information about your clients or research subjects that breaches confidentiality, and misrepresenting to the public the services you provide, the products you sell, or the level of your expertise. The posting of insulting or offensive opinions, including writing such remarks in documents, usually does not violate the code, even though doing so fails to engage in civil discourse. If such remarks are determined to constitute defamation, then posting them would be considered a violation of the Code of Ethics. So now we're going to do a learning activity where I want you to look at some example tweets or Facebook posts and decide if these would be something that you would want to tweet or that you would not want to tweet. So the activity is called to tweet or not tweet. So we've got this first one here on the left, an image of a clinician working with a client. And the post reads, Jaylee makes me smile each week. Hashtag best 12-year-old ever. Hashtag autism awareness. Hashtag SLPs rock. So this one is clearly a violation of the code because it contains several pieces of protected information, such as the name, the age, the diagnosis, and the image of the client. So this would be a not to tweet example. The next one is a picture of a card, a picture stimuli, or stimulus rather, and it says, when your third grader exclaims, it's jaundice. That one, I think, does not violate the code of ethics. We don't have any identifying information, name. We have the grade, but we don't have disability. I think this one was meant to be humorous, and I don't think that this is a violation of confidentiality. Okay, then we get SLP's rock. I just cured the stutter of an 18-year-old in 2 weeks. 2 weeks of therapy at Bluegrass is a game changer. Hashtag SLP superstar. Hashtag we can help. So this is an example of a post, I made this up, but a post that may be used for the intention of promoting business. But in fact, it misrepresents the nature of the services provided by speech-language pathologists. It goes back to the principle that we first discussed, where we are called to not misrepresent the services or the nature of communication disorders, and stuttering, I don't think, could be cured in 2 weeks. Okay. Then we get cleft palate prose, bestow your wisdom upon me. I just moved from elementary into high school and have a 9th grader with very poor intelligibility due to cleft palate. She recently had a follow-up, and I'm hoping we might be able to make some progress now that structural concerns are settled. What tips, tricks, resources have you found useful for this population and age? Again, I think this one was posted, we could imagine maybe in a private group, but it still contains a lot of information about the client, and it may be possible to identify the identity of the client just from reading the post. So this is one that I would not post. I would just reword and say, will you please provide resources for high schoolers with cleft palate? So I would avoid the additional information. I mean, we're saying that she recently had surgery. We're talking about a low incidence disorder, the grade level. So yeah, I think this one could be avoided. Then we have this example. Did you see that the co-op is having Kelly Ellis speak on Friday? She is horrible. Everybody knows the co-op pays her for $20,000 for presentations, which is clearly not factual. I don't get paid $20,000 for presentations. I wish. And then the example of, did you see that the co-op is having Kelly Ellis speak on Friday? She is horrible. Hashtag no thank you. So just trying to be, trying to provide some examples of a post that may be an opinion. So the one that she's horrible, that feels more like an opinion, but then a statement that the co-op pays her $20,000 could be a little more on the side of making a non-factual statement. So I think both, whether you're talking about the one on the left being an opinion and the one on the right being an opinion plus an assertion, that some may consider more on the defamation side. I think both are examples of not using civility in professional, as a professional. So I would avoid both of those in terms of posting something similar on social media. Okay, now we're going to move to our second special topic, and this is the one focused on the assistant's code of conduct. So we know that ASHA has been committed to a framework of common principles and standards of practice for several years. I think ASHA was founded in 1925, and then we have the first code of ethics formalized in 1952. And then we've already discussed in this professional development that in 2016, the code of ethics was revised again. And then this year, actually effective on June 1st, the code of conduct developed for certified assistants will be implemented. So it will be effective on June 1st. So ASHA now has a framework for certification for assistants. So that can be audiology assistants as well as speech language pathology assistants. So they have developed a code of conduct to help define the assistant's role and provide conduct, a code of conduct to help with decision making. So the code of conduct is a framework that provides support for the day-to-day decision making related to an assistant. So again, it's applicable to audiology assistants holding the Certified Audiology Assistant, the CAA, speech language pathology assistants holding the Certified Speech Language Pathology Assistant credential, and then as well as applicants for the assistant certification. The Code of Conduct does discuss how assistants are not independent practitioners. So accordingly, assistants must be supervised by appropriately credentialed audiologists and speech language pathologists, those of course being consistent with state licensing laws and ASHA's Code of Ethics. So let's take a look at the Code of Conduct. The Code of Conduct is accessible on ASHA's website, and it does include a terminology section for about 20 terms. Several of those 20 terms are the word-for-word descriptions that were included in the 2016 Code of Ethics for speech language pathologists and audiologists. So very similar, the definition of negligence, fraud, conflict of interest, misrepresentation, and self-report, for example, are all the same. But there are two additions that are included that are not a part of the 2016 Code of Ethics. And these include gender identity, or one's innermost concept of self as male, female, a blend of both, or neither, how individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves. It's one's gender identity can be the same or different from their sex assigned at birth, so that's a part of the Code of Conduct. And then national origin, which is defined as encompassing related aspects including ancestry, culture, language, dialect, citizenship, and immigration status. So these are two new terms provided that are provided in the Code of Conduct. Now, the Code of Conduct for assistants, again, is designed to provide guidance, and there are 3 principles underlying the Code of Conduct. These include a responsibility to persons served, a responsibility to the public, and a responsibility for professional relationships. So principle 1 reads, assistants shall honor their responsibility to hold paramount the welfare of the persons they serve professionally. That sounds very similar to the 2016 Code of Ethics. Individuals shall honor their responsibility to the public by providing accurate information in all communications and by providing services with honesty, integrity, and compassion. And then the third and final principle, assistants shall maintain collaborative and harmonious intra- and interprofessional relationships. So on the next several slides, we'll review the conduct fundamentals. So for principle 1, A reads, assistants shall engage in only those activities delegated by the supervising audiologist or speech language pathologist. Assistants who hold the CAA or CSLPA shall engage in only those work areas that are within the scope of their competence, considering their certification status, education, training, and experience. Assistants shall not discriminate in the delivery of their service based upon things like age, disability, ethnicity, gender identity, national origin, race, religion, sex orientation, or socioeconomic or veteran status. So you can see that expanded list and why the definition of gender identity and national origin were included. Principle 1, Part D reads, assistants shall accurately represent the intended purpose of a service or product and shall abide by established guidelines for clinical practice. E reads, assistants shall protect the confidentiality and security of records of professional services provided and products dispensed as directed by the supervising audiologist or speech-language pathologist. Assistants shall maintain timely and accurate records about services provided and products dispensed as directed by the supervising audiologist or speech-language pathologist. Assistants whose practice is adversely affected by substance abuse, addiction, or other health-related conditions shall seek professional assistance and, where appropriate, withdraw from the affected areas of practice. So we have a similar principle here related to diminished decision-making ability. Assistants who have knowledge that a colleague is unable to provide professional services with a reasonable skill and safety shall report this information to the appropriate authority. Internally, if a mechanism exists, so perhaps at the level of employment, otherwise externally. Assistants shall provide reasonable notice to the supervising audiologist or speech-language pathologist in the event that they can no longer provide clinical services. So this one is related to client abandonment. Then J reads, assistants shall enhance and refine their professional competence and expertise through engagement and lifelong learning. K, assistants shall make use of technology and instrumentation consistent with accepted professional guidelines in their areas of practice under the direction of a supervising audiologist or speech-language pathologist. And L, assistants shall not misrepresent their credentials and shall fully inform those they serve of their role and the role of the professional credentials of their supervising audiologist or speech-language pathologist. So you must be clear in stating that you are an assistant. Okay, principle 2, A reads, assistants shall not misrepresent services. B discusses how you shall not defraud or participate in fraud through intent, ignorance, or negligence, or engage in any scheme to defraud in connection with obtaining payment, reimbursement, or grants and contracts for services provided, research conducted, or products dispensed. Point C, assistant statements to the public shall not contain misrepresentations when advertising and promoting their services. D discusses how assistants shall not knowingly make false financial or non-financial statements and shall complete all materials honestly and without omission. And then we're talking about how assistants should not engage in dishonesty, negligence, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation. Point F, assistants shall avoid engaging in conflicts of interest. And then we move to the final principle, which has several rules here, but the first one is that assistants shall work collaboratively with audiologists and speech-language pathologists and members of their profession to deliver the highest quality of care. Assistants shall not engage in any form of conduct that adversely reflects on assistants or the assistant's fitness to provide service. Applicants for assistant certification shall not knowingly make false statements and shall complete the application and disclosure materials honestly and without omission. So this, again, gets to that self-disclosure expectation. Assistants shall not engage in any form of harassment, power abuse, or sexual harassment. Assistants shall not engage in sexual activities with individuals served other than a spouse or other individual whom a prior consensual relationship exists. Assistants shall reference the source when using other person's ideas, research, presentations, results, or products in written, oral, or any other media presentations or summary. And then we move to assistants shall not discriminate in their relationship with colleagues, and it's based upon several factors. Assistants with evidence that the assistant's code of conduct may have been violated by a certified assistant have the responsibility to work collaboratively to resolve the situation, and where possible, and if it is not feasible, to inform the Board of Ethics. And then assistants with evidence that the ASHA Code of Ethics may have been violated by a speech-language pathologist or audiologist would need to inform the Board of Ethics if feasible or necessary. Then assistants shall report members of their profession to whom they know have violated standards of care to the appropriate professional licensing authority or board. Assistants shall not file or encourage others to file complaints that disregard or ignore facts. And assistants making and responding to complaints shall comply fully with the policies of the Board of Ethics. Then I think we have 4 more. M reads, assistants involved in Code of Ethics and Code of Conduct complaints shall not knowingly make false statements or withhold relevant facts necessary to fairly adjudicate the complaints. Assistants shall comply with local, state, and federal laws and regulations applicable to their practice. And then O, assistants who have been convicted or found guilty or entered a plea of guilty or no contest to a misdemeanor or any felony need to notify ASHA's Standards and Ethics Board. And then assistants who have been publicly sanctioned or denied a license or professional credential by any professional association, licensing authority or board, or other professional regulatory body shall self-report by notifying ASHA. Okay, on this slide, I have included the ASHA link to the ethics resources that we've talked throughout the professional development. Again, I wanted to highlight the issues and ethics statement, the instruction for how to file a complaint, the guidelines for responding to a complaint, and there are also examples of typical ethical inquiries that are received by the board. Okay, in concluding, I would like to share a quote by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow that states, "It takes less time to do a right thing than to explain why you did it wrong." So in summary, I would like to thank you for your participation in this web-based professional development. I would like to thank the Kentucky Southeast South Central Educational Cooperative for this opportunity. And I would like to provide you with some last steps. So if you have any questions about the course content, please feel free to contact me directly at my EKU email address, which is kelly.ellis@eku.edu. You should now complete the quiz that you received via email when registering for this web-based session. 80% accuracy is required for verification of completion. However, multiple attempts are permitted if necessary. When you are finished with your quiz, you should submit the responses to the SESC Cooperative by emailing Christy Allen, and her email is listed here for you. And after she verifies your quiz score of at least 80%, you will then receive your certificate of completion. This professional development session has been submitted for approval by the Kentucky Board of Speech-Language Pathology and Audiology. The references are listed on these last 2 slides. And again, thank you for your participation.